Well, welcome everybody. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to a really fun opportunity today. This webinar with Brandon Mull, and I have long been a fan of his books, and I'm sure many of you have as well. So it's just a real privilege to have him on today. Sometimes in my view, we tend to elevate people who become famous or achieve some notoriety in the world from the things that they're doing, and we sometimes think maybe they're a little bit unapproachable. But seems like a very down to earth kind of guy. I've had a conversation with him before this, and this is going to be a lot of fun. And I think as we go on through this interview, people are going to see that life's challenges hit everyone. They don't skip somebody and say, I'll leapfrog over this person. Everyone experiences some negative things, and it's why we're here in this laboratory of life. And so today we're going to have an opportunity to hear from a master storyteller, a little of his story. And so, Brandon, welcome to our event today.
Yeah, I am happy to be here.
Awesome. So, Brandon, let's get started so that we all understand a little bit about your background. Just some brief bits about who you are, where you're from, where you grew up, something about maybe things you enjoyed doing as a kid. Just what made you different as a child?
Sure. Yeah, I'll give you some basics. So I grew up in California and Connecticut mostly. I was just moving around with my dad's job. He was in pharmaceutical industry. And I lived in my head a lot as a kid. I my parents would peek in the room and see me alone, very content. I was the oldest kid, so I had to kind of entertain myself, especially when I was young. And they would catch me just walking around the room, playing little weird games, just alone, right? But really had stuff going on in my head. I hated being watched when I was doing that because I knew it looked absurd because I was acting things out, and I was in my head. It was cool. If someone was watching me, it like disturbed the illusion. I was like, go away. I'm playing my games. That was like the phrase. But ever since I was little, I lived in my head a lot. And I think in some ways in school, sometimes that it was hard for me to relate to other people for a while. Like I just had an odd brain that lived in its own way and in my own mind for a long time. And so I had to do something over time, which I call harness the crazy, which was take what's different and weird about me and try to harness it and make it useful.
So what did you like doing as a kid when you were young? What were some of your hobbies or things that you would do? Did you play any
Sure.
sports or anything?
Yep. I played baseball, played soccer, organized, and then casually just played with kids in the neighborhood. We made clubs, kids in the neighborhood. We had an explorers club. I have a book called Candy Shop War, where we really did have a club where we explored and trespassed all over town in about fifth grade. And I made that happen in that book. It's kind of my autobiographical fantasy adventure for some of the character stuff. So
Fun.
yeah, I was curious. I wanted adventures to happen. If I could have gone through a portal to Narnia, I would not be here. like I would have absolutely gone. I was trying to for a while, and when I couldn't physically go through a portal into another world, I started making up those stories. Started writing adventure stories. Maybe in some ways, wish fulfillment on the adventures I would love to have.
What was your first experience writing a story? Like, what grade were you in school when you started experimenting with like creative writing?
Yeah, my first attempt at creative writing was probably in first grade. I think it was just a class assignment, but we were just supposed to write a story and illustrate it. And I spent 3 days at the back of the classroom working on it long after everyone else was bored with it. And my teacher left me there because I think it was some peace and quiet, because I was that kind of kid that was like a little chatterbox, right? Highly
Yeah.
distractible. But this writing a book in first grade, it wasn't a long book, 10 or 12 pages, where it's like, a sentence or two per page, right? And a picture.
Yeah.
But I really liked it. Even then I could see like, oh, I like this part of school. Like I liked making up a story. And then I started getting more serious about writing stories as I got older. And um, there was a point where I realized the stories in my mind were cooler than some of the books I read, cooler than some of the movies I saw, and I had no way of sharing them. So I started practicing writing. I got into writing because of my imagination. I didn't get into writing for a love of writing, or like I didn't like writing an essay any more than the next kid, but as a means for sharing stories I had in my head, it was like, okay, well, I don't know how to organize a team of filmmakers and do it that way, so I'm going to write it down, right?
That's funny. So you're writing. I imagine you wrote some longer stories as you got into your teen years. Were you
That's right. Yeah,
experimenting?
in high school, I probably wrote my first novella in high school, like a short novel, and um, I practiced writing lots of short stories. My premise being that if I could learn to write a good scene, I could eventually learn to write a good novel, and so I could write some lousy short stories instead of some lousy novels. You know what I mean? As I
Save
was
time,
learning,
huh?
right? And I never was trying to make them lousy, but I knew. I compared what I was writing to my favorite authors and was like, okay, I'm not there yet. Maybe let's see if I can develop if I keep at it.
Yeah. So going through high school, then what did you always plan on serving a mission, or was there a process there that you questioned that and then decided to go?
Yeah. So testimony wise, I always had a sense and a hope that the gospel was real, that Christ was real, that God was real, that the church was telling me true things. Um, and I definitely I kind of followed maybe almost a stat what I would think of as a standard pattern is in adolescence I started questioning, well, is it really? You know what I mean? Like, and it wasn't like I questioned it with a ton of doubt. I questioned it going, well, I want to know for sure if it's real. I sure hope it is. I kind of expected it to be because I was like, oh man, life is cold and lonely if this stuff isn't true. Um, and it was just walking around in my house, out in my yard, kind of talking to God conversationally, that I had my first experiences of kind of feeling the Spirit. Um, it was a more conversational kind of prayer than you would do, formally. But I found my whole life that as I, in my private time, am more conversational with God. To me, maybe because the sincerity I bring when I'm being conversational, to me it brings better results. And so I had felt the Spirit and thought I would probably serve a mission because I'd felt the Spirit and thought it was probably the right thing to do. When it came time to pull the trigger, I was a little gun shy. I was in a band with some friends and I was like, I don't want to leave this. This is pretty fun. But but uh but in the end, I prayed about it, felt good about it, was excited for the adventure of it. I'd always wanted an adventure, right? And took off to Chile when I got my call.
So, okay, so what did you play in the band?
I sang. I
Oh,
played. I dabbled on keyboard, but like I'm not a pianist. I dabbled on keyboard like enough to fill in some chords, but like it was we were three choir geeks and the other two were better musicians, but we could all sing, so we'd sing 3-part harmony stuff.
hmm. Oh, that's pretty cool.
It was more like folk rock or something. Like it was like it was, and I wasn't the spearhead. I was the tag along.
Hmm. That's funny. So you went on your mission to Chile, and uh, probably around 90 ish, 90. What time frame is that? Early
Yeah, I was in
90s?
Chile from
Late
94 to
90s?
96.
Okay. So did you I don't know what the what was your first experience of the country like being on your mission, you get down there and kind of what did you first experience being out there?
Yeah, it was a pretty good oh no, what have I done kind of thing when we got there, because northern Chile is the driest desert in the world, the Atacama Desert. Not the hottest, but the driest. So most of it looks like the moon, just an absence of life, absence of vegetation, absence of bugs, absence of anything. I never tracked it in the rain once because it just didn't rain. I met grown men in some cities that had never seen rain their whole life,
Wow.
and I didn't see rain for 2 years. I saw mist sometimes in the coastal cities, but that was it. When I first got there, I mean, I'm looking around. It is dry. It is unspeakably dry. It is shanty towns. It is, like it wasn't. It had, Chile really wasn't truly third world. It was more like in between, right? Like second world, if that's a thing. But it had functioning postal service. It had some pretty great places. But Antofagasta, like the northern Chile, was sort of almost like the backwoods of Chile. You know what I mean? This is their dry, lost desert cities. You know what I mean? Like really great people, but scary to look at. And it was weird that like, the first few days I was like, oh man, like this is going to be concrete floors and different kind of food and knocking on little shacks and just kind of, 2 weeks later, it was just normal, And the rest of my mission, it felt pretty like the language was the tougher part, but after a few months, I started to get the hang of that too. But yeah, very overwhelming at first. A beautiful thing about my mission was I was a total, I had an easy suburban upbringing. My life had been easy, right? Like comfortably middle class, maybe upper middle class, in such a way that I was never hungry. I was never, you know what I mean? Like I didn't have a hard life in some of those ways. Emotionally, sure, I had all sorts of troubles like everybody, but my childhood hadn't been really hard. And going to a place where I didn't know the language, suddenly I was robbed of my humor and my personality because I couldn't speak. And I realized, I really lean on that. You know what I mean? Like that helps me get through a lot, and plus everything was so foreign and different. I learned the really valuable lesson that the Lord, the more you lean on him, the more you feel him. And so like that played out my whole mission. Like I got in a situation where it really was in over my head. I didn't know how to do it. There were many times when I wanted to just go home. You know what I mean? Because I just felt like a failure or felt like it was too hard or, and I don't think I could have gotten through it if I hadn't learned to, okay, God is real. I can lean on him. And when I feel connection with him, suddenly things that were hard start to feel easier.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally understand that. So, so you're in Chile. Okay. So I have to ask this. You're in the desert. I mean, were there rivers? How did they get water up there? Where was it pumped from, or where did it come from?
Yeah. So you've got the Andes Mountains running up and down Chile. And, on one side of the Andes, you've got the rainforest and stuff. And they're creating some sort of rain shadow, I think, in the Atacama. So you had rivers coming down from the Andes that would empty into the sea. And if you lived in northern Chile, you either lived where one of those rivers met the sea helping to moderate the temperature a little bit, and the river bringing the fresh water, or you didn't live there. You know what I mean? Like you had to be on one of these rivers that's cutting across from the Andes.
Hmm. Did you said Rain Shadow? I thought that'd be a good novel name, so you just keep that in mind.
Yeah. It's not bad. Yeah.
Rain Shadow. So the you did get obviously water, and there wouldn't be anybody up there. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, they're pulling water out, but they really are kind of pulling it out of. You got to live by one of these rivers that comes across, and that they're storing it in personal water towers. Sometimes the water gets cut off. I mean, it was a place where water was a commodity for sure.
yeah, wow.
We had one baptism where we could only fill the font about maybe generously halfway, maybe a third of the way. It was way low. And the guy was a really good sport. And so it was kind of like developing a photo. I had to spread him out really flat, on the floor of the font to get him all the way immersed.
You
And
like
then,
had to put yourself partly under to help lift the water
oh
level.
yeah, I mean it was like looking on both sides, like trying to make sure, okay, we got the feet, we got the head, we good. You know what I mean? It was ridiculous. I mean, we almost should have waited. It would have been more reverent maybe, but he was excited and we were excited and we got enough water to kind of do it. But that's it's not usually the problem of the baptism is that you're out of water, but we were just out of water. And so we barely baptized him. Yeah.
Well, that's funny. Huh. Do you have any other real kind of highlight experiences on your mission that kind of defined, like when you went out, you kind of said, well, I was maybe a little bit unsure, or there were times when you were not sure if you'd be better off just going back home. And so, were there
Yeah.
ever was there an experience or two that like really defined your testimony on your mission, where you were like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I'm here, and that just blows away all my the issues I've ever had, kind of thing.
Yeah. I so before my mission, I'd had some good experiences as far as feeling the spirit, knowing that I had felt it, being aware that I had felt it, being aware that there was a heavenly Father who was answering me. I described the process of growing into revelation now, kind of like if I was an inmate in a cell and I'm tapping on the wall saying, hey, anybody here? Tap, tap, tap. Anybody here? Tap, tap, tap. And eventually I get some taps back and we start working out some form of communication, and gradually those taps increase. And I start to understand what his taps mean, and he understands what my taps mean. And then all of a sudden you cross some thresholds, and suddenly you can kind of hear each other, and it's not just tapping anymore. To me, it was like that. Like for a while, it was just a yes of I'm here, like a confirming feeling, like, yes, I'm here. Yes, I love you. If I asked a question, I could sometimes get a yes on it, and a no would be the absence of the yes. Right. And so that was sort of what I was armed with heading down to South America. And probably about 2/3 of the way through my mission, we had a lot of, there was a lot of pressure to baptize in my mission, because it was a place where there was a lot of success for that. And so, and sometimes that pressure to baptize could get in your head. I was missions are organized where you've got zones, right? And so I was a zone leader for a while, and as a zone leader, I really felt very real, not evil pressure, just pressure, right? Like it was coming from a good place, but there was pressure to baptize, pressure to lead by example, and I didn't have to take that pressure the wrong way, but for a while I think I did. You know what I mean? Like where it was more important to look like a good missionary and to be a good zone leader, and like that was becoming more important in my head than helping somebody find the gospel. Like the helping someone find the gospel was secondary to the goal of baptizing and being a good missionary, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
And I had a night where I was sitting with my companion, and we were talking about that, and talking about how we were probably overly stressed, and we were stressed. We were the co-zone leaders. We were trying to be a good example, and everything was we just weren't having a lot of success with people to teach, people to move along. And I said, you know what? Like, I think we're just doing this all wrong, man. And he was like, yeah, because I was like, we shouldn't be baptizing out of fear. We shouldn't be trying to teach people out of fear or trying to look good or whatever, right? And in practical sense, we'd kind of moved into that space, not deliberately, but it's what we were doing, more or less, right? And so we started talking about, like, man, maybe we just need to like forget about all the pressures and just go like love people and try to teach, and just not think about the pressures, not think, like, the goals have become counterproductive for us. We need to turn off our brains on the goals and just go do it right. And when we said that, the Spirit came with a lot of power and confirmed that, yes, do that. Like, and that's not always true. Some people, it's like, you really need the goals, right? But one of the beautiful things about the Holy Ghost, and the beautiful things about our Heavenly Father, so much of the gospel, so much of what we have to learn is nuanced, right? So much of it is finding the right balance between two good principles, things like that, right? Like, it's good to have goals. It's not good to have goals if you're worshiping the goals, right? Like, instead of worshiping God, kind of, right? He's like, there's a balance there. It's good to have goals, and also it's good to actually love the people you teach, right?
Yeah.
And we were definitely erring on the side of goals, and the Spirit was confirming, yes, you would be doing a lot better if you just worried about loving the people and teaching the people, and forget about your goals, and forget about how you look to your zone or how do you look to your mission president. And my companion intelligently said, hey, let's split up. and pray. And split up and pray was like same apartment, 2 different rooms, right?
Right,
Um,
right.
and he was praying and I was praying. And for my part, as I moved into that space and talked to God about that, he flooded me. I've been praying my whole mission to know, like, for sure. I want to know for sure that this is true, right? Like, not just feel like little tap, 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 little tap back. I wanted something, super confirming. And I'd had lots of little confirmations. When I say little confirmations, any one of them would have been enough to go on, right? To trust that God was there. But on this particular night, about 2/3 through my mission, he hit me with the Spirit so long and so hard and so incredibly tangibly, both in my mind and in my physical body, that I reached a point where I said, okay, that's enough. Like you gave me enough. Had an angel appeared, it would have just been icing on the cake. Like no angel appeared. I didn't see anything with my physical eyes, but like I knew I had a very sure witness, and that changed everything. And interestingly, perhaps as we went out with that new Spirit, we had all sorts of success. All the success we'd wanted came as we kind of did it in the right way. And like, not like the ultimate success ever, but plenty of success, more than our fair share. You know what I mean? It went really well. We found people to teach and had beautiful experiences. And so I came home from my mission. I mean, to me, that felt like a baptism by fire type experience. It felt like the Spirit hit me so hard that I had been changed. I had been moved from, I feel pretty sure, to, no, I'm certain now. Like, I can't deny this. I can never deny this. That's why I came home from my mission.
Well,
With
that's
that kind of
awesome.
state, that kind of spirit. And then there was more confirmations after that, right?
Hmm. So when you first came back from your mission, did you head straight off to college somewhere?
Yeah, I went to BYU. I was a
Majored in writing, or
majored in public relations, minored in English. My secret was I was building a writing major for myself in the comms department and the English department. My secret goal was to write novels. I ran a comedy troupe called Divine Comedy. So we wrote and performed sketch comedy once a month. And that gave me some practical writing experience, putting my stuff in front of an audience. And then in my professional side, it was just learning everything I could about writing.
cool. So what jobs did you work before? Fablehaven is your first book, right?
My first published book. Yep.
First published. Okay. So before Fablehaven was published, what jobs did you have that you were getting by on?
Yeah. I worked as a I worked as a marketing guy for entertainment companies. So I worked for Excel Entertainment, which made some of the LDS movies like Saints and Soldiers or Work in the Glory. Like I was on those marketing teams for some of those movies. And then I was a marketing guy for Deseret Book, writing marketing stuff. That all happened because, see, I was going to go. One of the things I learned when I did PR was I didn't necessarily want PR to be my life. After I majored in PR, I was like, okay, I'm not sure that's exactly what I want to do, but but it was good skills, and it was, what I wanted to do was to write novels. And so I was going to go teach English on this Navajo reservation in southern Utah. I decided maybe that's what I would do for my day job while I worked on my books on the side. And my wife was on board for that. And man, like when I tried to pray about that to get my answer, I had a contract in hand. It was the plan. And I just could not get an answer on it. I couldn't get that yes feeling that I was really used to getting. And I flipped the question sometime after midnight and said, am I just not supposed to do this? And it was like, yes, you're not supposed to. And that was rough at that moment because I see my wife gave me a gift when we got done with college. She gave me a year to write. So she worked, I wrote, we had no kids, right? And so it was a window of opportunity. So I wrote a novel and it wasn't Fablehaven. And and then she got pregnant. That window of opportunity was closing. Time to get a normal day job. And the normal day job was this teaching thing. And then I got a no on it. And I was like, oh my gosh, everyone I know is going to think I don't want to return from being writer guy to having a day job again. And oh yeah, God wants me to not work. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
it was like,
Right.
how am I going to sell this? Right. So the first thing I did was I woke up my wife and was like, hey, I'm feeling like this is a no, which is so weird. Cause I mean, I'd been down there, we'd interviewed, we'd done all this stuff to make it happen. And she woke up and she prayed and she felt the same thing. And so, the next day came, and sometimes on the next day after you receive something, you're like, look at it in the light of day. You're like, really? Am I going to say no to this opportunity? I have a kid coming in weeks. I have no job, I have no employment history post college because it's, I can claim I was writing a novel and they could read it if they wanted, but no pay stubs. Right. And so, an unpublished novel. And so, but I'd had enough experiences with the Spirit to know, hey, if you're going to ask and he's going to tell you, then you turn off your brain after that and do it. Right. Like, and so I did it. I called, the principal of the school and said, yeah, I'm not going to come. And I talked to my wife. I felt like something was just going to come along. Though I felt something was just going to come along, I still kept looking. Yeah, maybe it'll come along because I'm looking. Right.
Right.
But when it came, it just came along. A friend called up. He was an old friend that I knew through my comedy troupe, and he was working on the marketing team at Excel Entertainment. He's like, we need guys. I didn't have to pray about it. I could just feel it right in the moment. It was like, yep, this is the thing. So I went and started working there. And that led me on a road to being at the right place at the right time when Deseret Books started a division called Shadow Mountain, where they were trying to publish mainstream fantasy. Just it's only LDS in origin because it's clean. That's it. You know what I mean? Like, which was something that was kind of new for Deseret Book, but I thought a really great idea because you can reach different people with stuff that's not explicitly LDS, right? Like that's just good values, good principles, but not explicitly LDS. Reaches a wider audience than just Mormons talking to Mormons or Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints people talking to, you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
but like, so I honestly, I trace back my success at writing and my start at writing to the fact that I heeded that prompting. Because otherwise, at the time when I was right there at the start of Shadow Mountain, and they heard about me because I was working for Excel Entertainment, and they wanted to see my stuff, and I shared what I'd written, and they said, "Oh, we don't want to publish what you wrote, but what else do you got?" I told them I had this idea about a secret wildlife park for magical creatures, and the guy, the editor there, was like, "Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, that sounds like the right kind of thing. Why don't you write that and show us?" And that was Fablehaven. Within a couple of years, I quit my day job and was just writing novels, and I have been ever since, 17, 18 years.
Wow. So how fast, okay, so they published Fablehaven. How fast did that take off?
Here's the thing. When you want to publish a novel as an unpublished writer, I thought, okay, once I publish a novel, that's the finish line. And you cross that finish line and you're like, oh, nobody cares. Nobody knows, nobody cares. And you realize that finish line of getting published was just the starting line of having people find it, right? Letting people know about it. So then began the marketing phase of my life, partly, you know what I mean? Where it was half writing, half marketing, and lots of assemblies and school visits and bookstore visits and library visits. And man, at first, just nobody cares. And you're just hoping, like, is this good enough that if I get it started with a few people, it'll spread? And that happened. So by the time I wrote book 2 of Fablehaven, I was able to quit my day job. But so it happened uncommonly fast. But it still felt slow. It felt slow partly because it was, I was trying really hard to succeed at it, and it took till 30. And when you're used to, I'm pretty used to succeeding at stuff because I try to pick my battles smart, try to do stuff I think I can accomplish,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a hard one. like I knew I had a really good imagination. I thought I had good stories to tell. It was still very, very hard to get published. And, but the charmed path started that at around age 30, when I published Fablehaven, it just kind of caught on, and the marketing stuff we did worked. And, pretty soon I thought I will never live in a house as a writer. That's just never going to happen. I just looked at the realities of income and stuff, and no, like a few years later, I'm in a house, and, a few years later, I'm in a beautiful house. And it was, like a blessed path.
Mm-hmm. Well, that I totally understand what you're talking about there with you're working on something, you're building it, and once you get it done, it's like, oh, I'm just at the start line now. So
I have this
definitely,
cool thing. Like, is scripture notes that for you?
it is, yeah, it is.
I've got
So
this cool thing. Like, if people really understood what it was, they'd be so excited. And and then you're hoping you're right. You're like, I
yeah,
think I'm right.
exactly.
I think this is a cool thing. And then as you put it out there and share it, and you get some good responses, that's so validating, such a relief.
Yep.
Those, for me, those early readers who first liked it and seemed excited about it and wanted more. When I first published it, Desert Book was like, we might do a book two, we might not. We'll see how it goes. It was that kind of deal. And so it was a huge relief that it was like, no, yeah, we want more. How many more can you give us? That kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and you've done a second series on it now too. So
Yeah,
um,
Dragon Watch is the sequel series to Fablehaven, and that's been really strong too. Its readers have really liked it. So
yeah, that's cool. So you've got success, and you've got a number of books out. You've got a lot of books out, but I mean, even your first book, Fablehaven, goes New York Times bestsellers list, right?
yeah, I mean, the first thing that hit was book two. That was the first one to hit the list, and then working backwards, book one hit the list after that, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But yeah, since then I've written
Well, that
about 18 New York Times bestsellers, some that have hit number one.
yeah, that's fantastic, and not at all common. So
No,
that's
no, I feel it's a huge relief because it's like I go down to my basement. I pretend like I'm a 13-year-old girl talking to a centaur. I write that down, and somehow it pays the bills.
right, right. So you're kind of up on top of the world. I mean, things are going really well,
Yeah,
and you've got you just one book after another, New York Times bestsellers list. And so, what uh, what happens next for you? Like, life's
yeah.
good, but
It's just been easy ever since. I'm just kidding. Wouldn't that be nice, right? Yeah,
yeah,
that's not how
exactly.
mortality works. Um, I had, and hopefully, I hope other people don't go through this experience. I had my own personal nightmare scenario kind of played out about 6 or 7 years ago, where my wife and I were. My wife was so supportive of my career. This is my first wife, Mary, and she bought me time at the start. And as we worked, it was like, hey, I had to be on the road a ton. I had to be gone a ton. I was gone 5 months out of the year, usually off marketing, right? Like grassroots marketing, where I'm there in person, right? Um, and we had this division of labor. She was doing the kids, I was doing the books, and I was paying the bills, and the bills kept getting paid better and better, and it just everything seemed pretty good. And then it just about 5 or 6 years ago, she was done, and that was incredibly hard because for me, I don't know. I think I thought we were on the same page. So I thought we were on the same page on certain things that we gradually weren't. And I had some real blind spots, in who I was as a dad and who I was as a husband, and not deliberate blind spots, true blind spots where, I just didn't see. And as we tried to work through things, it came to a point where it was like, hey, I feel like I would have stuck in there forever and tried. I did not want it to end, and she felt like it needed to end, and she had her reasons, right? And it wasn't, just, I mean, I guess to be fair to me, I had been generally inside my covenants, if that makes sense. I hadn't gone outside that stuff, but um but it just really wasn't working for her in a way that she needed it to end. And for me, it was just devastating. It was, it's impossible to sum up how I felt inside. I mean, only the Savior knows how much that one hurt, because there's certain things that your whole heart is set on and your whole worldview is set on. Like for me, that forever family was what everything was was based on for me. Like that was my why when I was out there on the road. That was my why for pretty much everything. And so and I honestly think it was my why a little too much, like ahead of the Savior, even ahead of God, even like the forever family thing was like, that was my why. Right. And I wasn't trying to put that above God, but I think in practical terms, I probably did, because when I lost that, I was done. I could say there's no success in life can compensate for failure in the home is a true statement and a really good suicide note. You know what I mean? Like when that gets lost, and like I really felt it, and I also felt. I remember, and there's when you're waiting in line for the temple, there's this thing they were playing by Elder Holland at a temple, undedicated temple open house, right?
Open house, yeah.
And in this thing, he's saying, he's like, if he was talking about his marriage and his love for forever families, and he's like, if I couldn't, I'm paraphrasing him, but it was, if I couldn't go to heaven with my wife, there'd be no heaven for me. And that's how I felt. There was now no heaven for me. Like it felt like if that was an eternal marriage, then this is an eternal wound. And it was very akin to the feeling I imagine a deer might feel when it drags itself off just to be alone so it can die. And I really, if it hadn't been for having kids, I would have, I think, you know what I mean? I would have drugged myself off. And as much as I had, I had a testimony of God. I had a testimony. Remember I told you I'm on mission. I had, and I'd had experiences since then. It wasn't just on my mission. And so I knew God was real. And man, it did not matter that he was real at that time. It didn't seem to matter. It was like, who cares if you're real? Everything's destroyed. Everything's ruined. Like, who cares? Like the feeling was one of incredible disappointment, incredible like anger, apathy, like all those, like those things can't coexist, and they did, right? I'm trying to tell you how broken I was, just broken down to the core. And I think there's sometimes when people get a divorce, and to some extent they're like mutually like, yeah, this is good. I wasn't there. I was not there. I was destroyed, right?
Yeah.
And so like, I remember having a talk with my mom. I was like, Mom, what do I do? What do I do? Like, because I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't feel anything. And she's like, well, when it's hard, you just hold to the rod. And basically I was like, yeah, that's all I got. Because I was like, I mean, being very real, like I was like, if I kill myself, I know I don't stop existing. You know what I mean? I know it's just a change of state, and I'll step into a whole new bunch of trouble, and I disappoint my kids and my family. And I was like, yeah, I can't do that. Though, I mean, thoughts like that were there. It was that devastating, right? It was that world ending for me, which is maybe healthy, because though I had those thoughts, I like my life now, by the way, spoiler alert, you know what I mean? Like, it's okay. But man, I couldn't see out, right? I just couldn't see out. I couldn't see how it could be okay. And all I was losing as far as time with the kids, and as far as all my kind of my hopes and dreams for my life, right? And for their lives, just felt like such a failure. And I remember I went up, go.
What were you doing to kind of cope with, because you're in such a dark place there. I mean, like what kinds of things helped kind of get you through until you got to a better place?
Yeah, no, that's where this is going.
Okay.
It's only worth saying how terrible I felt because there was an answer. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But like, it's very useful to say how terrible I felt, because it was the extreme was so bad and so bleak that it really helped what solved it for me feel like a miracle, you know? And so with that hold to the rod kind of business, I was just like, okay, I got to double down spiritually. That's all I got left. It was the only thing I could even see that made sense, that still felt like I had value. I was like, at least there's still God, and I know he's there, even if it feels like he failed me, right? And Incidentally, whenever we think God is failing us, it's because we're failing him every time. But like every time. But but it felt like he was failing me, right? And I remember I went out on my driveway and I held out my hand and I said, I need you to come. I was like, I have nothing. Like I don't even want to remain on this earth, and I'm going to remain, and I don't know how to do it if you don't help. I need you to show up. I need you to show up now. I need you to take my hand. I need you. And in that moment, I didn't he didn't show up in a very tangible way, maybe in a very quiet way, right? In a very quiet way, I felt heard, and that was it, right? And I've learned that sometimes you got to hang in there because there might be a delay on these things, like it takes a little while. And this didn't take a super long while. The next morning, I woke up with all the answers I needed and stuff. But for me, it was really, really simple. And it's funny how it kind of comes back to love. Remember, I said on my mission, I got told what it was in my heart was I just need to love the people instead of worry about all this other stuff. And what I woke up with the next morning was just love her. Just love her. That's it. Just love her. Like, you don't have to fix her. You don't have to catch her. You don't have to change her. You don't have to do it. Like, you don't have to figure this all out. You don't have to save it. You don't have to teach her anything. Just love her. That's it. It's like, just love her. That's it. And when I got that, the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I'd been in a state where I'd been trying so hard to frantically save it, right? To figure out what I had to do or say or whatever to save it. And he was like, just love her. That's it. That's your answer. That's it. Just love her. That's all, right? Like, don't try to save it almost. You know what I mean? Just love her. Just sit there loving her. And as I did that gave it the best shot that it would have had. Because once I wasn't so frantic, she could actually settle down and decide if she really wanted this divorce or not. And she kind of saw the best side of me and could decide while looking at the best side of me. But what I want to tell you is that next day, and after I got that answer and said, yes, I'll do that, or I'll try to, that next day, God granted me the capacity to do what he'd asked me to do. I did not have the capacity to do it. I would have gone on for the next few months to try to do that, as I still got lost in my stress and my pain and my everything, right? Like, I went to the temple that day. I was fasting. This is the day after that prayer on the driveway. And just in the temple, as I was worshiping, all sorts of beautiful things happened, which is too much for me to go into right now. But the gist of it, the guts of it, are that Christ showed up for me in a personal way that I could understand. And he changed me and healed me in a moment. In that moment in the temple, and this is like, I wouldn't testify of this if it weren't true, because I would never want to give somebody this kind of false hope, because for a long time this didn't happen for me, right? But in that moment in the temple, he took away all my pain. He just took it. Usually there's only two ways to deal with pain. You can numb it, right? Often through sin or distraction, right? You can kind of numb the pain. Or you can face it and grind your way through it and process it and metabolize it till eventually you work through it, right? In this case, I found out there's a third option. He literally took the pain. He just took it. He took it, not leaving me numb. In fact, leaving me with more ability to feel than before he took it. But he just took it. When I say he took it all. I wasn't divorced yet. Like, I went through the whole process of leading up to and going through the divorce. I felt no pain the whole time. Like, none. And like, it was like, I would try to describe it to friends because everyone was so worried about me. And I was like, I think they thought, he's dumb, he doesn't know it or whatever, I was like, no.
Total denial.
I was like, I am like an anesthetized man in a torture chamber where you're chopping off my thumb and I'm like, Man, I'm going to miss that thumb. I don't feel the pain though. It was just gone. And I promise you, I was I was incapacitated with pain for the previous couple months. And that was just at the prospect of what might happen, right? Like the divorce wasn't official yet. It wasn't, right? Just the prospect of it. I was incapacitated with pain. And after Christ got involved, he took the pain such that I didn't feel pain through the rest of that whole journey. I couldn't even muster it if I tried. Pain. He didn't just do that. He took the pain. He increased my empathy. I didn't know I'd been low empathy my whole life until he increased it. He increased my ability to see other people and to see my kids. And like, I honestly feel like I was somewhere on an autism spectrum, and he shifted me somewhere else on the spectrum where suddenly things that were blind spots were visible now. And so he took my pain, he upped my ability to feel on empathy, which let me be a whole different kind of dad and a whole different kind of person. He, in the same moment, he decreased my anxiety permanently, where anxiety had been my whole life. I stressed my way to success, kind of, right? He just turned it down permanently, like no medication, no anything. He just turned it down. And he upped my ability to hear him. So those four things happened all in one moment. And I didn't know such a thing was on the menu. I had never imagined such a thing were possible. For a window after that happened, it felt like, is my mortal test over? You know what I mean? Like it just felt like, like a visitor here, like I wasn't a participant anymore. And I'm not kidding you. Like after that moment, if I turned my mind to God, he answered any question I asked immediately. And there was like a honeymoon phase, kind of, or like a newborn phase right after this experience. And I've spent the rest of the time since then trying to understand what shifted. How do I keep shifting? How do I, that for me was my, my pivotal experience in my life. And it was the experience in my life where I learned something. Sometimes I had viewed having a testimony as an end result. Like once I have my testimony, then I just nourish that testimony, and that's it. Testimony is an end result, right? And a testimony is so important and so great to obtain, and like is a prerequisite to so much. But what that experience taught me was that testimony is prerequisite to a relationship. You can't have a relationship with someone you don't know exists. And if you know he exists and you don't have a relationship with him, you are missing out on the blessings of having a testimony. You are missing it. You're missing everything that the testimony is supposed to lead you to and mean. And I didn't know that until I was 40 something going through a divorce. I thought I had a relationship with Christ because I was going to church and reading my scriptures. And it took an extremity of pain and holding to him in that extremity of pain to help me learn he's actually there and can actually help. And you can actually communicate with him regularly. You can communicate with him daily and get impressions and hear him daily. Like, that changed everything for me. And so now I live in a different world where what I'm working on is my relationship with my Savior and letting that spill over into the rest of my life. And it makes everything better. I am remarried miraculously to a wonderful person. She brought in 7 kids. And so it could have upped the stress a lot. It was good that he worked some kind of change in me, because believe me, I don't feel like my life is over. You know what I mean? Like, mortality is still plenty hard. And I have greater muscles and spiritual muscles and greater capacity. And then he matched me up with something that would let me use that capacity, right? I mean, 7 more kids, a new wife, blending families. It has been an adventure. We've been doing it about 3 years, and it is hard and it is good. And it is beautiful compared to feeling like a ghost in my own home without my kids. And now, I still have my kids some of the time, but those days when I didn't have my kids, just it's like, what am I? Because I really like being a dad. And so adding 7 kids, I wouldn't have drawn it up that way. I wouldn't have been like, I'm going to add 7 kids. But it was the right woman and it was the right situation. And so now with a better ability to hear the Savior and with some of those gifts from his help still intact, as far as I do deal with pain better, my anxiety stayed low. Sometimes you have a spiritual experience and then you go right back to normal, 30 minutes later. I'd say that's more standard than abnormal, at least in my life. You hear a great talk, you get into the spirit. In that moment, you have no disposition to do evil. And 30 minutes later, you're yelling at the kids. You know what I mean?
Right,
like something like that. And that stuff that Christ fixed in me that day, some of that stayed fixed. It didn't ever backslide.
But I think
it was like, it changed my whole view of salvation because it showed me like, oh, like that had nothing to do with me except for putting myself in a position to be healed. That was it. Just choosing him. That was all I did. I chose him. And it was like, all I could say was thank you. That was all I could say. There was no like patting myself on the back. I didn't make the pain go away. I didn't up my empathy. I didn't drop my anxiety. I didn't logic my way through it in any shape or form. All I did was realized I was in over my head, reached for the extended hand of help, and got more help than I knew was on the menu. And it was, it changed everything for me.
It seems like exactly what you said. We have those little brief spiritual experiences, and then it's not penetrating enough, and we go right back to how we have always been. And it's not until we have something significant happen where it's like, oh wait, there's a cancer there, inside me, or something significant that I need help. I have got to rely on the Lord, and then we have these experiences that are we're in the depths, and it kind of the way you described it almost makes me feel or hear a little bit of like Alma the Younger story, right? When he's in the depths of despair, and he remembers his dad talked about Jesus, and he just reaches out, and he said, like in an instant, he went from the deepest despair to pure relief. And it's just an amazing thing.
Pain is a spiritual opportunity. No one wants pain. No one seeks pain. And that's wise. You don't need to seek pain. But when it comes, it's a spiritual opportunity, because Christ gave a recipe on how we get to him. And the recipe is a broken heart and a contrite spirit. And if you pause and think about that, a broken heart is not fun. You know what I mean? And sometimes we don't even know how to make that heart break. Not everybody has to go through a divorce. Not everybody has to get cancer. Not everybody even has to have a huge tragedy. But everybody who wants to get to Christ has to have an experience where they learn to actually rely on him, instead of in theory rely on him. That to actually realize he's really real. You can actually rely on him. You can actually put all your eggs in that basket. You can actually consider him your best bet. For me, it took what it took, right? It took enormous pain. But a broken heart and a contrite spirit is, in my definition, you are in enormous pain. Your heart is broken. This heart that is usually hard and insensitive is broken and now sensitive and reeling, right? And if in that moment you can stay contrite, you can stay humble and choose God and Christ in that moment of brokenness, in that moment of everything's broken, everything's destroyed. If in that painful moment you can have the wisdom or the trust or the testimony to go, okay, this is what I've been training for. Now that I'm in pain, now that everything's breaking, can I still choose Christ in this? Can I stay humble? Can Can I go for healing instead of blaming him? Right? Can I go for healing instead of turning from him? And in a calm, rational moment, that seems very much like the right choice. In the heat of the agony, you want to be so mad. At least I wanted to be so mad at God. And I wanted to show him that if he was going to do that to me, he's messing with the wrong guy. And I was, like, I'm going to go somehow find happiness in every wrong thing. Like that wouldn't have worked out, right? It wouldn't have worked out. But there's a natural man side of me that's really screaming for that. And if you can take pain, especially real pain, emotional pain, stuff that really matters, right? Like things breaking that you can't live without, that you thought were everything. At the end of the day, you have to be able to say this sentence and mean it. There is nothing you can take from me and nothing you can withhold from me that will make me stop serving you. That's where you have power. You can make that choice. You do not have the power to be perfect, and neither do I. We just don't have the power. You want to prove it to yourself? Go try. You know what I mean? Go be perfect next week, right? Mm-hmm. Like you don't have the power to be perfect yet. You will someday, but you don't right now. What you do have the power to do, what is it's within your reach, is to choose Christ fully. It is within your reach to choose him and say, you know what? I might be your clumsiest, most awkward, most broken disciple. And I'm your disciple no matter what. Like love it or hate it, I'm yours, right? Like I'm choosing you. If you can do that, you will be saved. He does not fail if you choose him, right? And you have to choose the way God chooses, right? When God chooses, it's irrevocable. When he makes a choice, he makes a choice. And we have to learn to choose like that. We often say, I made that choice 10 years ago. And like, if you then abandon your faith, no, you didn't. You thought you did, but you didn't because you abandoned your faith, right? Like if you really made that choice that I am choosing Christ, the proof is that you never leave him. You know what I mean? You might screw up, you might do terrible things, but you never deny him. You never turn from him. You keep trying to get to him instead of turn away from him. And if you make that choice, especially in the time of great pain, if you stay contrite when your heart is broken, he does the rest. Your power is to make the choice. His power is to give you the capacity. We make the covenants. Then we have to learn to mean the covenants, mean the choices we made. And then if we actually mean the covenants we made, he will then grant the power to keep the covenants, which power we do not have.
Yeah. Well, that's beautifully put, Brandon. Thank you for sharing that. One of the things I've thought about recently, I guess, because our family's been through our own set of painful challenges, is, what doesn't kill me sanctifies me. So it's all a process of, like you said, coming to Christ, choosing Christ every time. And
if we keep choosing Christ in us, what doesn't kill us will sanctify us. Yeah. If we opt out on him, then we're in for a really, really rocky ride. But that's also an option,
Yeah. Well, that is. I think we'll just end the interview on that note, because that is some profound thoughts there, and I think
that's the heart of what I learned through my most painful experience. Yeah. That's what I'm giving you. That's the heart of what I learned through my most painful experience. I believe it with all my heart. I tell my kids, if you're going to trust anything, trust the Lord. And I don't tell them that because it says so in the scriptures. I tell them that because he has helped me in personal ways that made me understand finally, he's real.
Yeah. Well, I want to open this up for questions from people. So if anybody has a question you'd like to ask, just click on the Q&A button down at the bottom of the screen and go ahead and type that. I'll ask a couple of questions while people type something up, and just kind of get this going. So one of the things that stands out most to me is you were a writer before this experience and you're a writer after this experience. What have you noticed that's changed about your writing since having this experience?
I more deliberately ask God to help make sure there's light in my stories. I always, I always kind of had that as a goal. I wanted my stories to have light in them. I wanted them to leave a reader better than that found them, right? And having light in the story doesn't mean that dark things don't happen. Like the story I just told about my own life, the darkest thing that happened in my life, the most painful thing, also was a gateway to the most meaningful experience I've ever had and some of the most meaningful learning I've ever had. And so, likewise, some of my stories will have characters might get killed or they'll face hard things or scary things. Or there's darkness in them, but I want the net result of my books to give people hope and light and true principles. And since that experience, I'm more active and deliberate about asking for God to help me make sure there's light in my fiction, so there's some truth inside the made up story.
Yeah. Um,
It makes the writing better too. You know what I mean?
yeah,
It just
yeah,
does.
yeah. Well, I look back at the first Fablehaven book when I read it, and I thought this was so fun. It's just creative and fun, and there were times I wanted to reach into the book and strangle Seth. Like, what are you doing?
Yes.
You know, and and I thought, how did you write this? How did you have this vision of like Seth as this sort of um, and you don't have to answer this particular question, but just
I can. Yeah.
yeah, how did you have this vision of Seth as this sort of uh,
Rule breaker.
rule breaker? Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the defining characteristic of Seth, from my point of view, is he is recklessly curious. He has reckless curiosity, which he considers his curiosity an excuse for breaking rules because he wants to. That's why, And there's a lot of kids. I've had that mindset in my life. I had a really good model of it in my brother, who was even more recklessly curious than I was. And so I was probably just drawn from kids I knew that were wired that way, right? And I wanted in Fablehaven to have one kid who was wired that way, to have a sister who was more wired for obedience, and to have them learning opposite lessons. Well, Kendra is learning that sometimes you can bend the rules or break the rules in an emergency, or there's a reason to do so. You don't always have to keep every rule. Like, not every rule is gospel truth, right? Some rules are there are moments to break them, right? And that is a truth. That's a true thing. And maybe to help not overstate that principle, we have Seth learning that there are times when there's immense protection and power in keeping the rules, in following good counsel. And so you have these two kids that are learning opposite lessons, which to me was interesting and fun, right? Like to kind of explore both sides of that.
Yeah. So Daryl asks, how hard was it to keep writing your books after your divorce, and how long before you felt like you found your why again?
Immensely hard. It's a empathetic question. Thanks for the question. It was very, very hard. I had to tell my publishers for a little while, if I had broken my back, would you expect me on the construction job the next day? And I said, my mind is broken. And that's what I used to write. I was like, so you might have to bear with me a little bit. And I was late on some projects for the first time ever, truly deeply late, like where dates had to be changed, like releases had to be changed because I just couldn't pull it together enough to write a good book. A good book comes from a place of play and a place of creativity and life. I was so dead inside for a while there. But with what I learned, I came through it with, now I think I write with more empathy and more insight, more perception. And, I hope that I can prove that as I continue to grow and learn and write more stories.
So about finding your why, what is there a particular, are you, what is your why now? Like,
What? Yeah, that's a good question. Like my why to what? Just to be clear.
your why to write. Like, why do you write? You
Yeah,
mentioned
sure.
like you try to inject light into your stories, but like, What's your what gets you out of bed in the morning when you start thinking about your stories?
Being super real. What gets me out of bed in the morning is I have one of the best imaginations in the whole world. And and to keep that a secret and not share it feels like a crime.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like the best part of me lying dormant and doing nothing. Does that make sense? Like one of the very, like, professionally, the best part of me is my really strong imagination, my ability to make up good stories. And so it was a part of me that I liked well enough that I took the risk on a career that might be a real slog, that might never pay off, that where I might work really hard and get a minimal result for that. It was anyone who gets into writing to make money doesn't understand how money's made, because almost nobody like, statistically speaking, you don't make money as a writer. Like it's a small club of guys that it's even a full-time job for them.
Yeah.
And so you and guys and girls, right? And so the only reason I got into writing was because I thought I had a really fun imagination. I really liked the stories I made. I really wanted to share them. And that is still my why. I like sharing the stories. So like when someone tells me, hey, I like your books, every time that matters to me, every single time. Like people are like, oh, you must do this all the time. I'm like, no, that's the reason I do it. Like, I mean, like the money you spend on the book, if it's a hardcover, I get about $2. If it's a soft cover, I get about 70 cents. And that helps my life work. Like that, you sell enough 100,000 books and $2 is 200,000 bucks, right? But like the reason I write is I have stories that seem cool to me, and I'm hoping other people will have fun with them as well. And then the thought of adding some light to that makes it have some meaning or purpose.
Anne asks, how many books have you written and what's your favorite one?
I've written about 21 novels, some other books, like picture books and stuff like that too. If you've never read me before, I mean, a good place to start is Fablehaven. It's my first book, but it leads into a really strong series, which leads into an even stronger series. 5 books of Fablehaven together are a really good ride, and it's kind of fantasy light. It's not like the learning curve is pretty shallow. It's not too hard to figure out what's going on in that story. A lot of casual fantasy readers like it great. Some fantasy, it's kind of like you have to be really nerdy and have a lot of buy-in and really like be nerdy about learning all these new races and names. And, Fablehaven's drawn from stuff most people have heard of, centaurs and fairies, but it still creates a really fun story. So yeah, you could try the Fablehaven series. That's it. Picking my favorite is really hard. If you're a little older, if you are a little more nerdy, my Beyonders series. Some of my dad friends really like my Beyonders series, especially that 3rd book. It's awesome. It's 3 books. But like, yeah, if you want silly and more casual, Candy Shop War is fun. Candy Shop War is kids discovering that magicians have come to town. They're sharing magical candy with certain kids. Different candies have different powers. And sort of mixes 2 ideas. Don't take candy from strangers. Strangers have the best candy. Like if those 2 things are true, that's the conundrum in Candy Shop War. You have these magicians with magical candy that gives you powers, and they have ulterior motives with why they're sharing it with you. So, it leads to conflict and hence a war, right? Candy Shop War. But yeah, I just wrote the 3rd one of that. That finishes that series. That'll come out in a couple months.
That was Natalie's question. The next one on here was when Candy Shop War 3 comes out. So,
oh yeah, Candy Shop War 3 comes out March, I think, like maybe 14th, or if not the 14th, within a week of that day. It'll come out in the middle of March, and it'll be lots of fun. I think it turned out really well. It ends. Candy Shop War was my accidental series. I only meant it to be 1 book. Then a bunch of kids liked it and asked for more. Like 6 or 7 years later, I wrote a 2nd book. And then 6 or 7 years later, I wrote a 3rd book. So, I mean, Candy Shop War book 2 was the 3rd. No, Candy Shop War book 1 was the 1st book I wrote. And book 3 is like the 21st.
So wait, first.
Candy Shop War book 1 is the 3rd professional book I wrote.
Okay.
And then the book 3 is like the 21st. So there's a huge gap between books, but now it's a complete series if you ever want to read it all together. Yeah.
So Okay, just so you know, like our kids, as they've grown up, we've read to them. We read all the Fablehaven, series to them. Read Candy Shop Wars, and
Cool.
we're trying to intersperse it with other stuff too. Like we read
Sure.
Narnia and other things.
Narnia is great. It's one of the
Yeah,
reasons I write. Yeah.
yeah. There's a lot of fantastic books
Harry
out there.
Potter's great. Really
Yeah,
fun, you know?
yeah, and we've done a lot of those, and we love listening to them on Audible on car trips and stuff. But
Yep.
we loved reading your books, and I know a lot of, obviously, a lot of other people have too. So, um,
It's a relief. It's why I can do it as a job. The fact that lots of people like it lets me do more of it because it actually pays the bills, you know?
yeah. So Aspen has a question for you here. She happens to also be my daughter. There's a little relation between Aspen and Oak.
Good. Oh, that's really funny. And Oak is a sweet name, by the way. That's gone unstated so far, but that's just such a killer name. And that's awesome that you named your daughter Aspen. That's genius.
Okay, so we are. I have my oldest is a Savannah, and then there's an Aspen, a Willow, Holly, and an Oak. So we are a family of tree huggers, you could say.
That's
But
really cool. I love that so much, like a lot.
my wife is Katie, and she always tells people she's the katydid that hangs out in the trees. So
That's great.
anyway, so Aspen asks, when you hit a writer's block and can't come up with any ideas, maybe you don't have that, but at least like maybe just in the moment you're like coming up with
Yep.
something. What do you
Everybody
do to
does.
get creative juices flowing of things? Is there any specific ideas of things that you do to kind of get that going?
Yeah. So for me, I've got tons of ideas. Like having ideas it has never really been my problem. It's like sorting the ideas is my problem. Is trying to like what ideas are worth spending time on, right? So sometimes that's a challenge. And to beat that challenge, it's I look for what idea gets cooler the more effort I put into it. Sometimes I have an idea, and the more I think about it, the worse it gets. That doesn't last long. I kick that to the curb. But every now and then I get an idea, like the idea of secret wildlife parks for magical creatures, which was the Fablehaven premise. The more I thought about it, the more I was like, what kind of creatures would live there? Who'd want to help them? Who'd want to harm them? What secrets might they guard? What treasures might they hold? Are there different wildlife parks for different creatures around the world? Like, anyways, the more I thought about it, the cooler it got, and it became like an amusement park in my mind. That's how I knew the idea was good because it was a playground in my head, and the more I played there, the more fun it became. Um, After that, once I'm in the writing phase, there's moments when you're trying to write and you just get totally stuck. I don't care who you are, you'll sometimes get stuck. And for me, that's usually because either I'm writing a scene that's getting boring and my brain's like trying to warn me, like this isn't working, this is getting boring, this is dumb. Um, and when it's that kind of situation, I usually have to get some distance from it, think through where I'm at, think if the scene is necessary, think what I can add to or take from the scene to make it work, to make it interesting. If I can't make it interesting, then I kill it. But it's like I need a little bit of distance, and then to get to a place where I'm excited to write again. Usually, if I'm not excited to write, it's because the scene's bad for me. Usually, right? How do
Mm-hmm.
I get there? How do I get to where it's good? Take a walk, get some distance, think about what story I'm telling, think about how to give the scene enough trouble to make it interesting. Usually an absence of trouble is what's making a scene dumb or bad. There's got to be stakes in the scene to make it good. Those kind of things are how I fight writer's block.
So, what advice do you have for like the beginning writer that, maybe there's a parent here who has a child who wants to be a writer? I mean, like practice is good, but like what are some specific things that they should be exploring in their writing uh, to get started?
Here's a few things to think about. Um, the guts of getting good at writing is read a lot and write a lot. Read a lot and write a lot. Kind of doing both those things, right? To be more specific and useful, pay attention to how your favorite authors build their scenes. When you read a good scene in a book, if it's a good scene and you're a proficient reader, you will the scene kind of plays out like a movie in your mind as you read it. And you're not super hyper conscious of the words you're reading. When the scene gets good, you kind of flow with it. That's why sometimes you look at the clock and it's 2 a.m. You're like, wait, what? Because the book swept you away. You went in sort of like a reader's trance or something where you're experiencing it as well as reading it. And that's when writing's good. And also when you're experiencing a story that way and you're experiencing the scene for the first time, it's very hard to pay attention to how that scene was written, because it's also new and you're experiencing it and you're caught up in the moment and you're excited by the moment. And so when you read a scene that really, really works and that you really, really like, if you want to be a writer, go back and look at that scene a second time and look at how they did it, because it was just done with words, right? A certain amount of description, certain amount of dialogue, certain amount of whatever. Look at how that author puts you into that trance, right? Go back after you've experienced it once. Now you're going back. How'd they do it? You look at that for different authors, some of your favorite authors, and you start to notice patterns that click for you. And you build that into your writing as you try to learn to build your own scenes. And you gradually develop an ear for what a good scene sounds like and feels like. To me, if you do that, you'll become a good writer.
So who are some of your favorite writers that you either find very inspirational or just to have an escape? Something
Yeah.
you like to read or listen to?
For me, the special sauce is fantasy. That's why I write fantasy. So for me, I've always just fantasy has appealed to me. The writers that most influenced me were C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, and J.K. Rowling. When I read Narnia, it showed me how imaginative and cool a story could be. I hadn't thought, I had a good imagination and I hadn't thought about portaling to another world and having adventures like those Narnia kids. Once I read that, I daydreamed about portaling to another world for the rest of my life and wrote several books where kids portal to another world. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that really got in my head, that idea of like, oh, that'd be so awesome if you could portal to another world, right? So Narnia showed me how fun and imaginative a book could be. Tolkien showed me you could write fantasy and make it feel as real as a history. His fantasy felt so authentic. It felt like it had weight and importance. Events of consequence were happening. The authenticity of his world was incredible. It just felt so real and authentic, like a real history. And so he showed me that fantasy can feel real, that fantasy can feel authentic and genuine, and that it can teach true things, even though it's a made up story. Like I learned a lot about heroism through going on that journey with Frodo and watching someone small do something big, right?
Yeah.
And then J.K. Rowling showed me you could write a story with a young main character, but make it smart and twisty so an adult could like it too, right? Showed me you could write a story where the characters are young, but the adventure is smart and cool, and the world building is extravagant enough to rope in an adult mind as well. And suddenly you'd written a book that is for everybody, right? Like that a whole family could read together and everybody in the family is having fun. And that defined the kind of book I wanted to write. I wanted to write, not repeat Harry Potter, but write for that same reader. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Yeah. I remember when Harry Potter first came out, I thought it was just a kid's book, and I ignored it for years until one of my good friends from college, he'd been a roommate, said that he was reading the series. And I was like, really? Like, why would you do that? You know? And he's like, oh, you've got to read this. And I picked it up one day, and yeah, it was so much fun. And I can see the parallels to like the Fablehaven idea, you know, where you've got young kids, but it's very appealing to adults. And
Yeah, I
love
really
those.
like that, like kind of where she came at with the young main characters, but there's also adult characters, and and the story is smart enough that an adult can be engaged. Yeah, it just fit how my head worked, and I tried to write similar for a similar audience, I guess you could say.
Yeah. When you were a kid, prior to these books, I mean, Narnia and Lord of the Rings have been around for a long time, of course, but
Yeah.
before Harry Potter and stuff, were there some influential series for you as a kid? I remember the Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander,
Yeah,
and
those are awesome.
those were fantastic. I read those to my son too, just a few years ago,
Yeah.
and so those were a lot of fun.
Yeah, the Black Cauldron, Book of Three, that stuff.
Mhm.
That's cool stuff. And then there's also I like sci-fi. Like Ender's Game was one of my favorite books in high school. I thought it was so imaginative and cool. I really liked Dune. I thought that was just so grand and imaginative. Um, and so yeah, I mean, Harry Potter. I read that in college. I read 1, 2, 3 when I was in college. That's when 1, 2, 3 kind of all hit the New York Times list at the same time.
Yeah.
And for me, it was like you. A roommate said, "Hey, you should check this out." I had no idea it was how much I'd like it. And man, I liked it so much. It really altered the course of my whole life, like how much I liked it, because I shifted my writing sensibilities into that kind of genre. I probably before was thinking more like writing Tolkien-y type stuff, Brandon Sanderson type stuff. And after I read Harry Potter, I was like, nah, this is more me, like this space. So
it's a good space for you. So there's been a couple of comments here, really appreciative of your story. And one of them, Monique writes, "Your story about your relationship with Christ is so powerful. Thank you for sharing. Would you ever consider writing it into a story of its own?"
Yeah, I talked to God about that, in my prayers, right? I think about, how should I share what I'm learning about the Savior? And for now, he's said, not yet. Don't write a book just about principles yet. It feels like as I pray, he tells me, because your fantasy reaches a wide audience, as you embed light and little nuggets of truth, little principles, he's like, don't underestimate the good you're doing there. He goes, it's one thing to kind of approach it directly and talk directly about the principles. He said, it's another to kind of give some truth with a spoonful of sugar as you write these fantasy books. He's like, I need you doing what you're doing, is kind of what he's told me in my heart. And so would I like to someday write a book that focuses on what I've learned about coming to Christ as I've sought to come to Christ? Absolutely, yes. And if anyone's ever curious, I would talk to that about anybody. I mean, I would talk about that with anybody. I don't talk about my religion when I'm on book tour. Like when I'm on book tour, it is about literacy. And I don't, because the way the world works, if I cross those wires, I would distance a lot of people from my books, and those books are doing their own thing and sharing light in a different way. But in a podcast like this, I'm so grateful for the chance to talk about what I feel spiritually. This is the appropriate forum to share some spiritual insights. I would say this, like, something that's really helped me is writing down what I think God wants me to hear. Maybe that's partly because I'm a writer, and so writing is pretty natural for me. But when I pray, I say, what do you want to teach me? And I write what I think he wants to teach me. And sometimes he really takes over. Very much like how sometimes if I'm giving a blessing, there'll be times when he'll kind of take over and I'll say things I didn't expect I'd say. As I try to write what I think he wants me to know, just to myself, this is personal journaling, right? As I try to write what I think he wants me to know, there are times when he absolutely takes over and it turns into revelation. And it's just revelation for me, but it turns into revelation. And so I would, if anyone hasn't experimented with that, I would say experiment with that a little bit. It's amazing how God wants to reach you. He wants to communicate with you. And like the thing you have in your scripture notes that lets people, take notes as they're reading the scripture, what the Spirit says to you while you're reading the scriptures is your scriptures. That's what you need more than the scriptures are general advice to a general audience. What the general authorities teach us is general advice for a general audience. The scriptures don't teach you if you should be a painter or a poet or a construction worker. The scriptures don't teach you who you should marry. The scriptures teach you how to get that information for yourself from God. Like the scriptures say, hey, talk to me, learn to hear the Spirit, learn to be guided to truth, right? And so as we spend time doing that, as we write down what we think God's telling us as we read the scriptures, that's where we get what God's trying to tell you today. And that's where you build, for me, that when I say I have a relationship with Christ, that's the relationship, is that I trust he'll tell me what my next step is. President Nelson knows a lot of things. unless he gets very specific revelation just for me in some instance, what he doesn't know is my next step. He's not communicating to me my next step. He's telling me how to go get my next step. He's saying, hear him and you'll get your next step. Right.
Yep.
And so I love that God, Christ, the Spirit, they know my next step. And as I work with them and try to hear them and try to write what I think they're telling me, whether that's when I'm reading the scriptures or whether that's when I'm journaling or praying, I get all sorts of stuff from them. And I feel like I have a really good relationship with them. I feel like I know them in ways I didn't know them before I more actively try to write what I thought I heard from them.
Yeah.
I think when they hear us, they see us taking notes. They see us actually preserving what they say. They speak a little louder because they know we're listening. So like that, there's value in writing it. There's a reason the Book of Mormon exists.
Yeah.
Somebody wrote down the inspiration they got,
But and you're exactly right. Like one of the reasons that I developed scripture notes, not to talk about it here, but you brought it up,
yes,
is exactly that. Like I see something and a thought comes to me, I have to write it down. And there's things that I wrote 15, 20 years ago in my old app that I kind of hacked together for myself that I look at now and I'm like, that didn't come from me. That I don't have that kind of language or thought process. And it's just amazing to see stuff that I know came from a higher source, but I've preserved it. Right. And that's like journals and the things that we write are part of that process. And I also love
it's a really beautiful thing, man, that's powerful that there's a place right next to where you're reading the scriptures. You can write and preserve stuff. There's power there. I can testify of that, but go on.
Yeah. So like one of the things you said is, your books, even though it's not like, hey, here I am teaching scriptural principles, you've embedded it in there in a way that like, it's the journey every kid that starts to love reading goes through. They identify with some hero in a story and they're like, this is me. I am this, I'm Ender, or I'm, whoever, Seth, whoever they identify with. And it becomes magical for them. And they start like the Lord of the Rings. You take a Frodo or a Sam, how many people identify for a time with Frodo and then they're like, maybe I'm more of a Sam. He's really the hero of the story. I mean,
yeah,
Frodo doesn't get there without Sam, carrying him up the hill or whatever. And so those principles of selflessness and courage and all the values that really go into, we just say, the character of Christ, right? We're just, to me, like gifts of the Spirit are little slivers of God's life that he gives us to experience here. And so
it's a good definition.
When we experience those things, it's like we're just getting a taste of what God experiences like on a full grand scale all the time. And so stories are a way of transporting us as well into another place where we sort of adopt those really powerful characteristics for a time. And then, you finish the story and you're like, oh, where's book 2, or whatever. I want to continue the story. And really the story is, what am I going to do with what I just read? And so it's sort of like, for some people, a book like A Fablehaven or Beyonders or something is all they can handle. It's like, that is to them almost scripture. It's like it's helping them be that type of person that's a little closer to the truth, and maybe someday they encounter the scriptures and it takes them to the next higher level and so on. So I think, not that I need to tell you this, don't give up or something, like keep writing and keep injecting that light and truth in there. And I know, it's just going to continue to touch people's lives. And
a lot of the time, like with my stuff, there's a lot of kids that are reading the scriptures.
Yep.
And they read my books too. And my book hits some of those ideas. And when I say those ideas, I mean just kind of generally good values, right? I try to hook it to good values to some extent. Basically, conscientious characters facing tough situations leads to little moments, right? Little teaching moments. And so it hits them just from a different angle. right? Just
Yeah.
a different angle, maybe easier language, maybe a story that they can relate to in a different way. But it's, it can it can reach some people that aren't reading the scriptures, and it can hit people that are reading the scriptures from a different angle. That's the point I was going to make.
Yeah. So, last question here that's come in. Um, the question is, do you plan to write any new series soon? But I guess I would ask, like, what do you have? Do you have some? I'm sure you have new ideas because you're creative. You've probably got, I imagine, a notebook of ideas if they're not all in your head. I don't know how I could ever possibly hold so many story ideas in my head at once. You must write some of it down, right?
A little bit, but it's mostly in my head. It is my superpower that I can hold lots of stories in my head. It also, I think, gums up the computer for other things sometimes. You might find me a very spacey individual in certain ways, and I think it's because a lot of my hard drive is taken up by fantasy.
Yeah. So in terms of like new series, is there something on the near horizon? You got anything?
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, in some ways, the whole world, if they like my books, can be happy I have 11 kids, because it means I got to work really hard. I just got to keep those books coming. It's a lot of mouths to feed. It's a lot of college to go to, all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I'll be a book a year for a long, long time. What I have working on right now is a brand new series, probably called The Forbidden Mountain. And for me, I think it's the most epic thing I've ever tried. It's an idea I've been cooking for about 10 years, and it'll start out entirely in a fantasy world. We don't portal into this world. But I've built something really cool. It'll be a 3-book series. It'll be through Random House. We're just finalizing the deal right now, and I've already been working on it for a little while, and I'm really excited about it. So yeah, like, you don't know it yet, but there'll be something. My next series, this is after Candy Shop War 3. That still hasn't come out yet, but my next series will be something totally brand new. I did a lot of kind of finishing sequel series to Fable Haven with Dragon Watch, finishing Candy Shop War. Now we're going to do something just totally brand new. And sometimes people like me to go back to the old stuff, but it's like, come on, guys, I promise. like this one, like it'll be, once it's out, it'll be as good or better as anything I've done. It's really strong. So
Cool.
I hope that's true. I hope I can prove that by writing a good book. I'm working on it.
Are you looking at a release date in 2023?
Nope. Oh, 2023. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, next year.
This is 2023.
2024.
Okay.
So Candy Shop War 3 will come out in March of 2023. That's right. Man, I lost a year there. Forgot what year we were in. Sorry, man. Yeah. We're January. So 2024. Yeah, 2024 it'll be the release of that new series. And then it'll be, a book a year, 3 books, 3 years, that kind of thing.
Okay. Cool. Well, Brandon, thank you so much for being on today. This has been so fun and touching. I mean, you shared some really great principles that I think are so valuable that I think everybody can get some benefit out of that. But
I hope so. One of the things of going through something really hard is hoping you can make it useful somehow. So
right.
So I partly share about it because if it helps somebody, then it's a little more useful that I went through it.
Yeah. No, I totally agree and think that that's part of the reason that we go through some of these trials is you got to get some wisdom and pass that down to people and
trying.
So yeah, well, those are difficult, but life enhancing experiences in some way. So
yeah, true.
Anyway, thank you so much again for being on, and it's been great fun. Appreciate it.
It's great. It was pleasant conversation for me as well. Thanks a lot. And thanks for anyone who tuned in.
Yep. See you, everybody. Thank you for being here today.